Hi and welcome to lecture 16. In this lecture we'll continue our journey into unit testing in Ruby and we'll talk about RSpec. So far we've seen test unit or mini test, which seems to do the job, but now in Ruby it would be nice if you could write the tests even in a more descriptive English-like manner. And with RSpec you can. The writing of a test is more intuitive, and the output from running the tests is a little bit more intuitive as well. So how do you get RSpec? Well, you could just install it by doing gem install RSpec, which will install the RSpec gem for you. And then when you actually want to start writing the RSpec examples, as they are called, or specs, specifications, you could do RSpec -- init, and that will create a specs directory for you in which all the specs go, as well as some files, some additional files, namely the .rspec and spec helper, in which you could put code that applies to all your specifications, which we're not going to talk about at this time. So the top level method in RSpec is called describe, and that's basically a set of related tests or a set of related examples. Describe takes either a string or a class, which this test is describing, as we're going to see. All specs will go into a describe block. Now the slight difference here between RSpec way of doing things and the test unit is that there is no test case class to subclass. Everything happens inside the describe method. There is also a before and after methods, which are very similar to setup and tear down the mini test. The difference is that whereas in mini test, every test will run the logic inside setup every time, in RSpec you could specify an all symbol, which will basically say only do this once, and the logic in the all method or in the all block will apply to all the tests, so it's only done once. Now when is this useful? For example, if you are connecting to a database in your test, you wouldn't want to be creating and recreating a connection to a database before every single test. Instead, you just want to do it once before you run a group of tests and then close it down at the end of a group of tests. The main logic happens inside the it method, which is used to define the actual RSpec specification, or as it's called, example. It takes an optional string which describes the behavior being tested. So let's take a look at a similar example from a previous lecture. In the previous lecture we used mini test. Now let's see how to do the same thing using RSpec. So let's say we have the same calculator.rb, which has the erroneous behavior of subtracting versus adding, has a minus and add and plus and subtract. So we have this spec directory in which we're going to have all our specs, and this was created again a few slides ago when we did RSpec -- init. And basically there is no class here, so everything happens inside the describe method. So you have describe calculator. So calculator is our class, which we are testing, so require relative, and calculator, which is this class right here, which has the errors. Now we could also just do describe and put some string in here instead of doing the calculator, but since we're describing the calculator class, it sort of makes sense to use the calculator constant, the name of the calculator class. And our before method is going to say create me a calculator just by doing calculator.new and so on. And these are the actual specifications. So instead of how in mini test you did test underscore, you do it should add two numbers correctly. And then the block has the actual testing logic. So in this case, we're saying expect that the calculator add 2 plus 2 to equal 4. Now it's interesting how in RSpec the mini test expected and actual are actually flipped. So whereas in mini test you have expected, which would be 4, what we expected on the left, and the actual on the right. In RSpec, which I think is a little more English-like, a little more flowy how it specifies it, you say expect calculated add 2 plus 2 to equal 4, or expect calculated subtract 4 and 2 to equal 2. And RSpec in general is much more intuitive and much more English-like. So when you actually run these tests, and the way you run this test, the test is by just saying RSpec, you're going to see that there are two failures because both subtract and the add examples, right? So this one and this one fail. And it's going to tell you what the failure is. Expected 4, got 0, and it's going to tell you exactly where it happened. And so you could see that it's actually telling you which features it is testing by saying calculator should add two numbers correctly, calculator. So this is extracted from what you specified in your it description, which is very nice. So in summary, RSpec makes testing more intuitive. And the bottom line is, if you use Minitest and you like Minitest, stick with it. If you like the expressiveness of RSpec, try that out. And a lot of times people will tell you to write tests before you do the code. Some people do it before they write the code. If it's easier for you to get into testing, you could write them after you write the code. But the bottom line is, it's important to realize the importance of writing the tests and having the tests in place that actually test and exercise your code, and what actual framework you use or when you write the test is less important. The next lecture we're going to wrap up the testing and actually wrap up the module by talking about the RSpec matchers to see a few more matchers that are available in RSpec.